the district, they did thrive on the marketing people did a thing there in your book. Thanks very much for that.
No, I love it. So great. So great. We're happy. We had a clerk group there Monday night also, which I think may.
All right, testing. Oh, there we go. All right.
Little crew.
Okay, everybody.
Fun.
I'd ask that we
No, it's
kind of get rolling here. It's a few minutes after 6. And it's getting a lot darker now than the last time we were here. So I'm still fighting that battle with my son. All right, first item on the agenda, I call the meeting of the Webster Groves TIF Commission to order. Item 2, roll call. Fran, please call the roll of the members.
Kyle Wilson,
Present.
Ryan Murphy,
Present.
Marco Taylor,
Here.
Pam Fraser,
Here.
David Addison,
Present.
Mark Hinkle,
Present.
Andrea Nelson Robert,
Present.
Ray Golick,
Here.
Paul Hample,
Present.
Jay Nelson,
Present.
Jacob Trimble,
Present.
Kevin McKenna.
Present.
There is a quorum present and we will proceed to the stated agenda. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our October 27th meeting. And I actually had 2 revisions to be made on top of the revisions that are here. The first item that says the commission chair called the meeting at 8:02. It should be 6:02. That's a small thing. And actually, no, that was the only change I had.
Mr. Chair and members, we did submit a list of staff sort of suggested corrections that we would ask be amended and included in the motion to approve the minutes. They are on the table, in your table in front of you if you have. You'll see the corrections there.
So if someone makes a motion, Eric, do they need to
include those
reference the
corrections.
corrections that we are reviewing and have in our hands here? Okay.
Motion to approve, including the corrections.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The minutes are amended and approved.
Just for the recording secretary, that was Mr. Hinkle who made the motion.
I did.
David. Okay. All right, we're gonna move on here to item 4, discussion and possible action on the TIF Commission resolution and the letter of recommendations to the City Council. I'd ask that our staff liaison, Eric and Mark Grimm, to briefly preview the document drafts in front of us, our scope and role and process points for our consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Eric Peterson, staff liaison to the commission. Just a couple things in front of you submitted from different questions at the public hearing and then those raised from members. We did submit a document. It is available on our public website. The responses to the questions asked. So please have that. And if you have other questions, we'll continue to do that. There are 2 documents relevant to the action item for tonight. The first is obviously the statutory TIF Commission resolution, which deals with the statutory role of the TIF Commission and the findings that you would make regarding blight, the but-for test, the feasibility of the project included in that test, and then whether or not a recommendation goes to the City Council. It is a resolution you act on as the TIF Commission. Once that is received at the council, it becomes a set of ordinances for each of the project areas. So the RPAs that we reference and also the TIF plan. So those ordinances are drafted by Mr. Grimm and prepared for council action should you act. We also, and before I get to process for tonight, just by way of understanding what this letter is that you all received from us as staff that was drafted by the chair. There have been, over the course of our time and conversations, lots of conversations and questions about issues that aren't necessarily in the TIF Commission scope. And obviously your scope is set by state statute. And so if the commission wanted to make recommendations or known concerns to the council, we felt a letter was the more appropriate avenue rather than amending the TIF resolution, which is directly about the statutory requirements that you have as a commission. That does not, the staff putting this together does not mean we are going to do this. This is your decision as a commission, whether or not the letter goes, in what form it goes, and what's in it, if at all. So I just want to be very clear that we're putting that together so that you as a commission, if you feel like that is a thing you want to do, have that opportunity. It is rare, I'll just be blunt, for TIF commissions to make recommendations outside of their statutory scope. It's not unheard of though. So we didn't want to close doors as staff, but also just, indicate to you what is for the norm for TIF commissions. Sort of on the process points tonight, Mr. Grimm and I have had many conversations, and with many of you, I think it is fair to say that we are likely going to hear a conversation tonight and question about taking some more time to look at the financial model from some of our jurisdictions, which is completely fine. We can schedule another meeting if that is the desire. We do. The city obviously does need to act on the TIF ordinances in the month of December if that is your desire. So we would, hence the circulation of the couple dates that we sent out. And we can talk about next meeting dates if that's the direction you wish to go. But that would need to be done no later than Thursday night, December 2nd, in order to have the ordinances in front of the city council for actions in the month of December. So if that is the way that the conversation goes tonight, which is completely fine, I would suggest that we don't discuss the letter and doing it until we actually know if the commission's going to act and then what that action would be. Obviously, the letter is irrelevant if the commission decides to vote against TIF in any way. So just want to put that before you all. Mr. Grimm, is there anything I've missed in terms of process tonight or actions? So with that, Mr. Chair, that is, we're happy to answer questions. It's also a time you can ask questions of development strategies. The developer is here as well if you do have questions or discussion amongst yourselves, all appropriate and in order for your conversations this evening.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Eric. So as the chair, I guess I'm leading the meeting and I'm leading the discussion, and there's not really a set of instructions for this. So I've given it a lot of thought and how to sort of structure a discussion amongst the panel here. I spent a lot of time going back through the public comments, both those that were submitted via email and those that spoke here 2 weeks ago. Really appreciate, Fran, I believe that was your hard work in transcribing all of those public comments. The value of having these meetings recorded on YouTube is incredible. So, I was able to go back and read them and reread them. In doing so, I feel like I identified a couple common themes in all of those public comments. And I've got a list of those here that I'll identify. And so my thought was to take this discussion, identify those thoughts and concerns that the public voiced during the public hearing and have a discussion amongst the group on those. And after that is done, we can sort of take a temperature of the commission here as to whether or not we need additional time for anyone to review and reflect on the discussion tonight, as well as review the financials. So I identified 6 really common themes throughout those comments. Number one, multiple people made comments about what it means just to move money around the county. So I'd like to have a discussion about that, and I have some thoughts. Number two, many people had comments about there being not enough affordable housing, or the TIF should only be used for affordable housing, and I think there's discussion to be had around that. Number three, the discussion about risk. I really appreciated that comment about risk, and I spent a lot of time personally thinking about that, and I hope other people on the commission have as well for this discussion. Item number 4 is the floodplain. The fact that we are moving towards this, and we have a deadline because of legislation that is being enacted on January 1. And I think that certainly merits discussion. Item number 5 is blight, the definitions of blight, the fact that we are being asked to, as a part of this, blight the development area. And then finally, number 6, the ultimate thing here, the but-for test of the development. So that's how I have sort of outlined what I believe are the concerns. Is there anyone else on the commission who feels like I've missed any other concerns? I think also to the school board, and I think we need to have a discussion about your feelings We haven't heard from you yet, but go ahead.
So I think the thing that's missing is the discussion of of whether this is appropriate from a financial standpoint, whether this is in fact a fair, whether what the various taxing districts are being asked to give up versus the returns that they're going to get, whether that represents a fair return to the areas, recognizing obviously that if at the end of the day we don't do something here, if the developer has suggested that if we don't grant this, perhaps they're not going to be able to go through with it. But I think nonetheless, I think it is appropriate to discuss whether what is on the table is appropriate. And yes, and as you said, the school district is in, we've been having conversations with the city and with the developer just to try to find ways to go and address certainly the concerns that we have. I think, from our standpoint, as we look at it from the district, I mean, we look at this as we're going to, we think the TIF Commission needs to sort of work out, is this financially appropriate? And then as the specific representatives of the school district, we want to determine that it's appropriate, for the school district, recognizing that it's not just Webster for the school district, there are 5 communities. And so we're from a very different standpoint. And so that's the way we're looking at it. And then certainly our view is that in terms of, is this an appropriate development, things like that, that's something that city council then goes to decide based on what we're doing.
Okay, and absolutely. And I think that the fairness and the deferral, I think all kind of goes into that but-for piece, right? Because I think that the developer is on the record as saying, right, this is their definition of the but-for, it couldn't go. And I think that the financial piece of that is really important. So I think we can definitely want to address that during that portion, which will be, I think, the last. I think the other pieces need to be addressed and lead into the but-for, and then definitely want to hear more from the school district on your thoughts. So
Thank you.
yes, sir.
Appreciate
Thank you very much, David. Anybody else feel like I haven't hit on anything?
Yeah, for myself, I would like to hear perhaps from the city, again, just some clarification on the zoning process, where that is in terms of all of this. I mean, what action has been taken, still needs to be taken, and what we do here tonight or don't do here tonight, how does that affect that process playing out?
Okay, that's fantastic. Eric, can you address the sort of where we are in that process?
Certainly, do you want to start with that? Or do you want
Yeah,
to
let's
finish up?
start with that.
So
'cause I
I'm
think
going
that's-
to actually kick that over to Attorney Bruntrager as well, to make sure I don't misspeak in anything. Zoning ordinances, I've been through first and second reading at City Council and the public hearing, so they are waiting the final third reading. The council has said they are going to hold those, waiting for the TIF ordinances and also the conversations around the development agreement at the same time, right? That for the council looking at it holistically, there's an integrated approach to all 3 of these, right? You remove one leg of the stool, does it stand on its own? So I think while the actions may happen at different times, there is a conversation about, do we need to know some things in this document to understand how it affects this document? So zoning is pending before the council, third reading, so it's the one final action. But I do expect that, TIF will come out and to the council, and those packaged together in a way so that the council can see the more whole picture of these 3 things that need to be adopted. The development agreement is the other piece of that, which is we will start on Tuesday night with the council with conversations and attorneys in closed session to discuss the things provisions that are included in that and the ongoing negotiations with the developer. Does that help answer your question?
I guess just a follow-up then. So these bills that came before the council, those came upon recommendation of the city planning commission or zoning board? How does that work?
The planning commission was referred to those. They had multiple hearings and multiple meetings on those items. They voted 4-4, no recommendation. So they were issued on a no recommendation, 4-4 tie. So they penned before the council. I guess with no recommendation is the way to put it.
But the way the charter reads, no recommendation.
Can you use your microphone, Neil?
The recommendation that does move it forward to council.
Neil, can you
And I
use
will
the?
tell you-
Microphone.
I'm sorry. I'll tell you that one of our members had recused themselves because of potential conflict, and as a consequence, we had a situation where there was a tie.
May I ask a question too? So could you just go into a little bit more detail why December the 2nd is the date? Is that a timing issue with meetings?
So our council meets on December 7th and December 21st. Ordinances take 2 meetings. So December 2nd being the Thursday prior to the Tuesday for public notice and publishing, having the ordinances prepared and the notice and the agenda. So now theoretically, I mean, I'm going to look at the council here, Mr. Bruntrager. We could go to 1 meeting, but that is only for extraordinary purposes. And I would suggest if we can find a time to get before the 2nd, that would be the most advantageous without really moving the procedural boundaries far. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kyle, 2 other themes, and I don't know if they really fit in our jurisdiction, but size and scope and eminent domain are 2 pretty common themes that I've heard throughout the public comments.
Yes, I agree on that. The size and scope, I would say Clark probably fits more in the plan commission box. I don't know that we're necessarily here to discuss the size and the scope. I mean, certainly the size and the scope affects the value of the TIF that's being presented to us, but because we cannot ultimately vote, we can't vote for more or less TIF. I don't know that we can discuss whether it should be larger or smaller.
Right.
That makes sense.
And I agree with that. I think I just was pointing out that those were some themes.
Agreed.
And it obviously affects us if we need a $35 million tip because it's this big.
Mhm.
That does, I think, affect us.
Fair enough. I think that we can fit that into that, the but for discussion, I really feel like is like the all encompassing. Yes, David.
So just a point of clarification. You're saying that, if I heard you right, you said we can't vote for a bigger or a lesser TIF. It's either all or nothing.
That is
then with the idea that the letter then gives advice to council as to how we would like to go and do it if we want to do something different. And that's really the only mechanism that's available.
So that is, I've asked that same question from the beginning. Are we giving the resolution that we have in front of us that we reviewed? Is it purely an up or down vote, or do we have the authority to push it up or down? And I have been told, and I would ask Neil or Eric to verify that, but that no, our the purpose of this commission, our role is to discuss, take in public comment, discuss, and then give an up-down vote to the resolution as drafted for a $35 million TIF.
And so what you're doing is you will make a recommendation one way or another as to what's been presented, which I think is the more appropriate way to go.
Okay, so does the text of the TIF then that we have, does that reflect what we've been asked for? So would another mechanism to alter this be that the people who are approaching the city for the TIF, they ask for something that is different than the 35 million that we've been presented at the moment? So let's say they came back and said, I want $34 million. I mean, just to, I'm picking numbers out of the air, but would that be the another mechanism by which the TIF could have the commission could have an up-down vote, but something where, we get to decide whether it's appropriate?
I'm going to defer to Eric and Neil on that, but it's my understanding that would be part of the development agreement that's being negotiated.
Right.
So, yeah.
So in talking to Mark, 35 is the cap. The council can always negotiate something different. That would be part of the redevelopment.
And I'll explain that for you, Mr. Addison. So absolutely, we can negotiate things as part of the development agreement. We've seen in the letter, the surplusing of the pilot, issues like that. If you just look at the TIF without all those other potentials on its face, the developer could submit a revision of the plan that would restart the whole TIF process. And because of the deadline for this piece of property, that TIF process could not be met, because we would have to go to 45 days notice of a public hearing for a different TIF plan. And so by virtue of the deadline created with the impending new law and such, the plan that is submitted is really at the end of that feasibility for whether or not. So that it helps, I don't want to say helps, but it does bind you into on this plan before us, yes or no. And if a redevelopment plan was, another development plan was submitted, a revision for the whole area, the clock would run out.
Okay, so there's no mechanism to go and amend what's been asked for right now, then?
That is correct. So much
Okay.
like once, if approved all the way through, again, this is back to Mr. Grimm's nature of the plan conversation. Once approved, if the developer did not build the nature of the plan, they'd be in violation of the TIF, and we'd all be back here to discuss whether or
Okay.
not that's allowed.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Question, who drafted this resolution? So why is it that this commission cannot amend the amount of the TIF that's available?
Redevelopment plan is the city's development plan, not the commission plan. And so certainly the council would have the ability to submit an alternative. So if the city, as a city entity, goes to amend the plan, the city can do that. The commission is not.
So can you explain, in order to begin the TIF process, does the developer submit something to a city requesting a TIF?
It depends on different cities.
And how did this TIF process begin?
This process began at the point right where the RFP was issued. There was a discussion with the developer after there had been a number of developers that had been approached and invited to bid on this process. And the question that was being asked was, are you interested, are you looking for some sort of public financing? They indicated that they were, which triggered the need for the RFP. So it was in there from the beginning. It's what triggered it.
How did we get 35 million?
That's from the development strategies information. That's from the cost benefit analysis. All of that information is what's there. And the development. They put together the numbers. We talked about what the cost of the infrastructure, what the cost for the purchase of land, all of those things are built in.
So effectively, the submissions to council or to the plan commission thus far dictate the amount that the TIF is costing.
Yes.
Mr. Franco, just a reminder to flip the switch on if you, I don't think we could hear you. Push it. Is it on a green light on your microphone there? No, Mr. Franklin's, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to make sure we're all clear. So following on Mr. Franklin's questions then, so does city council have a way that they can go and change this without restarting the whole process?
City council, yeah, I think we discussed that previously. City council can make minor amendments to the redevelopment plan without coming back to the TIF commission. But substantial changes to the redevelopment plan require coming back.
Could they change it to $10 million in TIF? Can they go anywhere beneath that 35 million, just not
Sure, the
above
council
it?
could lower the amount of public assistance, but when the statute talks about, if the project remains the same. So if the project, if the nature of the project material change. Certainly, if the council negotiates lower amounts. Wouldn't have, if the developer were going to take less TIF assistance and build the same project, then that would not.
What would the order of that be? So could city council, again, back to Mr. Peterson's comments that in, December the 2nd is potentially the deadline. Would city council be able to change that number before the TIF commission voted on this?
Now, I will point out just to point on December 2nd, the statute requires that the vote occur within 30 days after the vote. I would like to see this. The commission needs to target a date within that 30-day period. What's your question?
No. So it's all around. I mean, I'm just trying to understand what flexibility the TIF commission.
Because we're having trouble on Zoom and getting text messages that no one can hear us at this table.
Mark, do you might want to take your mask off when you're talking?
Can
It's
you-
coming. We can hear you. If you're seeing the voices, we can hear the text.
Is mine coming up?
Mr. Nelson, I can see on the screen. So can you wave if you can hear us?
I can hear the commissioners. I cannot hear the individuals speaking with the mics. It's very hard to understand what they're saying.
Okay, we'll do. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Mr. Addison, can you repeat your question, please?
So I think really all I'm trying to understand is it's sort of, you know, it's a sequencing issue really, which is that so let's just say that, and I'll just take the school board, okay? I mean, let's say that as a part of a discussion between the school board and the city and the developer, we come to an agreement that a number other than 35 is appropriate. Is there a mechanism by which that different number can be the one that is presented to the TIF Commission so that we are voting up or down on a different number rather than voting up or down on what we have now and then relying on the letter that we're submitting to the council to try to get trying to get what the TIF Commission believes is appropriate from a financial standpoint?
Let's go on. I'll look at the statute and get back to you.
We could though include in the letter, and I know we've discussed it's not legally binding in any way. It's strictly a recommendation that is even a little bit out of the norm in this situation. We could include recommendations such as that.
Yeah,
As a formal request that's obviously public.
Right, but to David's point, I mean, the letter, and we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about it because at some point we have to get down the road and eventually to a vote. The letter is inconsequential if the TIF doesn't pass. And the letter is non-binding, right? These are just things that our concerns are potential to hope that it's influenced. And to your point, though, it is entered into the public record.
Right. So we can present, and we hope the council
Correct.
takes into consideration and acts on our recommendations outside of simply approving the TIF at the amount
Correct.
initially
Correct.
requested.
But
Kyle, I think there's a request you speak a little bit more slowly that I'm seeing up there. Either that, I'm not sure, maybe it's me they can't understand. So I saw something come up there saying I can't understand the speaker. Oh, maybe it's them. Okay, all right. You're talking quite quickly and I'm at times, all right.
All good. I will try to slow down. I do that very often, so no worries. Again, I think if the city council negotiates some level of TIF lower that potentially makes the deal undoable, then that's the risk the city council takes. I would recommend that we just kind of plow ahead here with the understanding that the TIF is on the table. I'm getting the sense that we're probably not going to vote tonight anyway. So I would recommend that we just kind of start to plow through the public hearing and the discussion, and then we can come back to some of these other points a little bit later. That'll also give Mr. Grimm an opportunity to read the statute and potentially weigh in here a little later. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Makes sense.
Can I add one more comment for discussion that may be related? I think let's view this as the way the TIF request stands today. I think one of the big questions, including the school district, is what's the impact on the taxing districts from the day it goes into effect, the day construction builds or it's passed to year 23. So I think that's clearly something that's front and center on the conversation of school board and certainly the other taxing districts. Is that impact what's happening today from a tax standpoint from that property? What's going to happen year 1, year 5, year 10, year 15, all the way up to the end of the TIF.
So, Mr. Addison, given the statutory requirements, we're not able to meet the various time requirements in statute for voting within 30 days of the public hearing and provide notice of an amendment to the redevelopment plan. What I would suggest to the school district, if the school district and the developer and the city were to agree on a lower amount, I would suggest entering into a cooperative agreement that is binding on those parties, among those 2 or 3 parties, and then have that in place before the vote were to occur. Would be one approach.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay. Anybody else who's not with us tonight but on Zoom, I just want to always make sure I give the opportunity to be recognized and weigh in. I'm always counting on Eric, but just in case.
All 3 members are here. I don't see anyone speaking up.
Okay. Fantastic. So I think a lot of that higher level discussion can come back into that but for discussion, but I want to hit some of these, the 5 other sort of common themes of the public comment. So the first one I talked about was there was discussion about quote unquote moving money around the county. I think one of the things that I've taken out of this in the desire to build the number of housing units is to increase the population of Webster Groves. By increasing the population of Webster Groves, we will get a larger portion of the pool taxes, which as the city of, from at least the city's position of the Webster Groves, we want to get a larger share of that pool of money. In that sense, you know, there's, what is it, 91, 90, 92 municipalities in the county. You know, obviously there's there's A cities and B cities, and I've tried to really research that, and I'm still kind of fuzzy on it, but from what I understand, Webster Groves, right, we get a proportion based on our population. So if we want more tax revenue, if we want a higher share of that money, we need to be supporting policies that increase the population of our city. And this is an opportunity to do that. I don't, you know, as far as retail revenues potentially being transferred around the county, kind of, again, at that point, I'm looking out for Webster Groves on this one. In my opinion, I'm interested in having more businesses here, more variety of businesses, and more density of businesses. And if people want to come from outside Webster Groves to spend money here, that's fantastic. Let's take those tax dollars. And if people in Webster Groves want to spend more money in Webster Groves, that's fantastic. Let's keep more money in Webster Groves. So, you know, I think that the cost benefit analysis, recognizing that it is a projection, you know, shows or demonstrates through their pro forma that the county, the city, and to an extent, the school district gets a bump in revenue over the course of the TIF. And therefore, you know, there's not a decrease in revenue, assuming that, again, that the projections and moving forward, and there is a little element of risk in there. So that's kind of the first item as I've dug through everything and listened to the commentary. And does anybody else want to weigh in on that item?
I'll check in a little bit. I think one of the things that gives TIF a bad name is if a Walmart or a big box store closes in Manchester and moves to Maplewood. You know, that's helping Maplewood, but it's not helping Manchester, and it's not helping the region. So I think what I heard that this concern or question come up is, who are these people that are going to be here, and where are they coming from? Are they hurting other parts of the county? I think this is probably a good question for the county. But, you know, personally, I believe that, you know, with 90 municipalities, sometimes we hurt each other. But also we have, right, urban sprawl. Is this a way to stop some of that urban sprawl, to fill in density into some of the areas in the region? Those are some of the things going through my head.
I mean, I'd agree with that. I look at the apartments in Sun Inn. You know, it's the convenience of the TOD is fantastic. Beyond that, there's nothing else around there. I mean, there's car dealerships. I mean, that's a terrible land use around a light rail station. But they're building another one, and that developer wouldn't be building another one if there wasn't demand for people that want to live in communities like Maplewood. And I would imagine that people would love to live here. So I think on the demand side, I look at our house prices. People want to live in Webster Groves. It's becoming harder and harder for people to live in Webster Groves. So this is an opportunity to create. I asked the question of Eric, how many housing units are in Webster Groves? There's like 95 plus or minus 9,500 housing units in Webster Groves. So, you know, this development represents the opportunity to add over 5% to the amount of housing units that we have here, and that equates to more families and more people and more taxpayers. And then I've heard talk of other multifamily developments in Webster Groves. There's a proposal for the Plan Commission for some condos, both the old Bank of America drive-through site. That's fantastic. You know, I would say pump up the, please silence your phones if you can. I forgot to read that warning. Let's, one of the ways, again, to continue to get more of our share of pool revenues is to increase the number of people and the density of Webster Groves. And I understand that there's concerns around traffic. And that's why I, in the letter, I suggested to potentially eliminate the parking minimums, let the developer build as much parking as they think they need, and no more. And that could potentially eliminate that induced demand and some of the concerns about traffic. But it's kind of like Yogi Berra said, nobody goes there anymore. It's too busy.
Well, I guess if the question was, or the concern was just moving money around the county, maybe is it appropriate to ask the developer questions?
Certainly.
Where
Or development strategies. either way.
where do you expect these people to come from?
I mean, I can comment a little bit just as a business owner and representing the taxing districts. And right now, when you look at some of the businesses that have opened as of late, I mean, I can name a couple just off the top of my head. Layla was a city concept that opened a location here. Union Bagels is Union Loafers, a city concept opening a location here. I know a city-based ice cream shop that's been actively looking for a spot here for probably 2 years and has failed to do so. Falcon was a food truck, so it was a nomad in essence that chose Webster as a home, as well as drawing a blank right now. The other one, what's that?
Gorilla
Yes,
Street Food.
and Gorilla is the other one I was thinking. So I think we're attracting businesses from outside of the county.
Yeah, I think businesses, but what about the residents? I guess that my question is where will these people come from that are going to move to Webster Groves?
From a comment on that as well, if you don't mind. I mean, and this is again based on personal experience. We have in our group, and I'm over 200 employees, and I'm assuming Old Webster Business District in and of itself probably has over 1,000 employees working in that district. I know for us, probably less than 1% live in Webster Groves, and probably even I wouldn't be shocked if half didn't live in the city or outside of the county. And we regularly deal with a challenge in staffing because the laborers for restaurants and businesses like ours tend to live in the city or outside of the county, or at least the immediate county. So I think it's a huge incentive for me to support this, and knowing that it would give our employees and other employees throughout our business districts affordable housing in Webster. And I think that also addresses parking and traffic, because if our employees are living in the district, they're then walking to work, they're riding their bikes to work. They're not using parking spots in the district. They're not driving on the streets. They're not, causing traffic, not causing parking issues. So I think it's a plus in all those worlds. And I also know, my parents were looking for a place in Webster Groves a couple of years ago, and they were in a loft downtown. So looking for Webster Groves, I moved here from the city, and the business district, the walkability, that the things that make it different from a lot of county municipalities is what attracted me to Webster Groves. I think this just furthers that, makes it more attractive to people that have spent a lot of time, lived in city environments, and are looking, because of kids, school districts, all the reasons we all move away from the city or the urban areas into county. I think making us more approachable to that is not a bad thing. And those places weren't available, and still are not.
I would like to
available in
maybe
Webster.
give development strategies a chance to weigh in on this, because they have built, or Larry for that matter, because somehow people have built a model based on demand. You wouldn't be building this or choosing to attempt to build this if it weren't for the demand. So if you could take a moment to speak to the demand for these units.
Well, we did a market study, among other things, that was shared in summary with the city, and it demonstrated that there would be a significant demand. But much as Mark was saying, just from people we know and personal experience, there are a lot of people who would love to be here who can't. They either can't afford or don't want to live in a big, large house. They want to have some other environment. They love the idea of Webster Groves and all the things that it brings along with it. So part of it's a gut feeling, which is what developers do for a living. And part of it is a market study that says we'll have really good demand.
Okay, thank you.
What was the radius of the market study?
Wasn't a radius. They targeted areas that would likely be candidates. And so it's a big finger shaped thing that were likely areas that people would come here. I don't have it with me, but we shared the study earlier. We can share it again.
So I think, I've had a lot of experience in creating community environments where we attract a lot of young people that want to participate in a walkable, rich environment that has restaurants, entertainment, and has the work opportunity that they can embrace that within the community they live. And I think one of the things that we've recognized with working with WashU, St. Louis U, is that there's tremendous talent, and you have it here in Webster with Webster University. You want those students and part of the academic community, the workforce that lives here, to live with you, because it creates diversity, inclusion, creates a voice that you're not hearing because you've eliminated a lot of people can afford to live here. So you're getting a narrower and narrower perspective on who could and would like to live here, but you got to create the environment for that to happen. So in St. Louis, you've heard about a declining population in the city, but in Midtown, we are growing that population significantly because we've paid attention to creating this environment that wasn't there, that now is happening. And in our case, 51% of what we have in our housing units is medical. So it's telling us we're capturing all of that incredible talent that comes into St. Louis from all over the world that wants to live where they're going to school and doing the residency. We're capturing a huge amount within Cortex. Once again, you don't want those people to drift away, because once they get in an environment that they embrace, enjoy, they tend to live here. And I've been fortunate enough to have my kids live in the city. And my daughter just came back from Savannah, and she's now living in the city, and she loves it because she can walk out the door. She doesn't have a car, get everywhere she wants to go, either on foot or a bike. She can walk to a restaurant. She can see entertainment. They have engagement pieces that we would create within our residential community that speaks to creating an environment that's inclusive, embracing, and we have events. So as Mark was saying, here you have all these people that work here, but they're not living here. So you're not tapping into what they bring to our community in terms of effort, energy. And I think that's, it's real easy to kind of exclude people when you don't think about it. And it just happens by what we're doing without thinking about how do we change that.
Phil, can I ask a question? Because I have a
Sure.
26-year-old son who's gotten himself to 52 countries somehow, and he's come back here during the pandemic and said, Dad, I would never live here the way it is. It sort of broke my heart because I had this, I live in Mayberry, but he explained exactly what you're talking about. So my question is, have you ever worked with Bi-State Metro in maybe helping to enhance some of the public transportation routes, or is that above the pay grade? Because the walkability is great here, but if you don't have a car, which he doesn't now.
Well, I think ideally you need all those things. Most of our projects are around TODs. So we have a big project next to the Grand Metrolink station. We have a lot next to Cortex, 2 blocks away. We tend to be on bus routes too. So people that need to get on a bus, all that needs to work. And the greenways are an important part too. I think What you're seeing an opportunity here in Webster that's just got started is you see the Great Rivers Greenway that comes in and kind of stops. That could certainly come into our development, connect with the Grants Trail and be a much bigger story that allows people to travel in a different way. And you're going to see, I think, what we're doing downtown, because we want people to not use cars because it cost us $25,000 to build a parking space. So we're doing electric car shuttle on demand. So we have these Polaris vehicles that we're going to introduce into the Grove and Central West End that will go out on demand through a phone that say, I want to go to Barkay, I want to go to Urban Chestnut, I want to go to the Armory. And we will pick them up and we'll build that into part of the marketing of how we get more business to ourselves. And it's a way to do, you got to be creative about all of this. And I think once you start down a trail of interacting, thinking, okay, I want my son and daughter to live here. How do I do that? You got to create an environment that makes that happen. And that means you got to have a price point that works. You got to have means of moving people around that are a little more creative.
Just as a practical matter, I mean, I think this is all great, and I think it's wonderful what we're trying to do in terms of growing this. I guess I'd ask the question, is this actually the role of the TIF Commission to go and look at this?
No,
Isn't this more appropriate that City Council, the TIF Commission is going to make a recommendation on the finances, and then City Council needs to decide, taking all these other factors into account, if this is what is good for Webster. I think we're in danger of getting, we're not the be all and end all of everything. We're looking at, do the finances make sense? Is this a good financial decision for the various parties that are involved?
I agree. That did get on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it was important to talk about, it started with moving money around the county. Where are these people coming from? Where is the revenues coming from? But I appreciate that. I actually would like to, I just have a quick question. I did the math. I agree with your $25,000 per stall in structured parking, and you've got 1,400 stalls in the development. 1,400 times 25,000 is $35 million. Is that how you came to the TIF amount, or is that just a coincidence?
No, there's no parking in any of that.
Larry, come on up.
No, I was just curious, like in the overall development performance, like it was just amazingly
The
coincidental.
budget was provided, and what the TIF is used for is the infrastructure, no buildings whatsoever. We have about 55, almost $56 million of costs to acquisition, to putting in the roads, to doing all the grading, for doing all the stormwater, for redoing all the infrastructure, putting in the park and all of that. And so this just gets us down to a net of about 20 some odd million, which is the baseline for land costs, on which we do build all of the hard costs for the construction of the parking garages, the buildings, et cetera. None of the TIFs being used for that.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so the second item that people have expressed a lot of concern about is affordable housing. Many people made a comment about that they would be in support of the TIF if it included more affordable housing. And I want to make sure we make sure we're clear on the delineation between what it means to have affordable housing and market rate housing. And I don't think that what they're proposing here is affordable housing in the true sense of affordable housing, because affordable housing is incredibly hard to actually build without incentives. Between land costs, construction costs, labor costs, you have to subsidize affordable housing far more than even the subsidy that they're asking for here. So one of the number one ways to create affordable housing, and if anyone who's concerned about affordable housing wants to read it, I recommend The Affordable City by Shane Phillips. Fantastic book. One of the number one ways you can increase the affordability of housing is to simply increase supply, which is one of the things we're talking about here. The opportunity here is to use a TIF to increase supply in our community, which will slow down. I do not believe it's going to decrease people's property values, but it will slow down the acceleration of property values. That's making it harder and harder to live in Webster Groves, especially at an entry-level price point. If you look at affordable housing deals that are developed out in California, they're almost entirely subsidized by a 100% TIF. So it could potentially give you a little bit of relief that no one's asking for $350 million of TIF, right? We're talking about $35 million on the table to create a development that does have some level of affordability built into it for people who we want in our community, teachers in our schools as a benchmark. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I spent a lot of time diving into that, having some conversations with people who finance affordable housing to really understand the challenges there. And so I wanted to make sure that was addressed because a lot of people have made comments about that. If we're going to give TIF, it needs to be more affordable. One of the best ways we can do and to create more affordable housing in Webster Groves is to increase density. So I want to address that. Does anybody else want to touch on that item? Okay. Item number 3 was risk. So the risk of the TIF. This is a big one. The city is not taking out a $35 million loan and expecting the revenues of the TIF to pay that loan back. So just want to be clear about that. When Ryan and I talked about this, and because I wanted to really make sure I understood what I thought the risks were. So the first risk is nothing happens. The baseline of the assessed value remains the same. There's no increase in value. There's no increase in revenues. The second risk is the development moves forward. The assessments do not go up as projected. I believe, Larry, on the developer side, you take that hit. The city doesn't take that hit. The 23 years goes by. The TIF, the development does not get the $35 million that they have expected. And then, the TIF duration runs out. The assessed values are up. The money then comes to all the different jurisdictions. And then the third scenario is the development goes up, does great. Potentially TIF pays off on time or early. Larry realizes his profits, and then the development continues to pay out at the end. Fourth scenario is the development goes gangbusters. There's a potential for the TIF to be paid off early. I mean, I think the mechanism that makes that happen would probably have to be as part of the development agreement. But there is an outside scenario that the TIF could get paid off early. So, those are 4 items that I think address kind of what the risks are. Let's say that they move forward, they plow the land, but for whatever reason it doesn't get built. There's a risk there. I can acknowledge that, but fundamentally then that land is ready for development for somebody else to come in and potentially develop something similar or something smaller. But everything here potentially lays the groundwork for more development. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts about the risk item?
So I think that one thing you're suggesting there is that if this doesn't go through, nothing happens. And I buy into the fact that for the next few years, probably nothing will happen. The idea that for the next 23 years, nobody is going to find something that they can do that's attractive to bring back another alternative to the city seems unlikely to me. I'm certainly not capable. I've lived here for more than 20 years. I've seen lots of changes from when I moved here to where it is now. I believe that over that time frame, something else will come up. I can't tell you what it's going to be, but I think it's all or nothing for 23 years. I don't buy into that.
I appreciate that. That's a great perspective. And I would say I would ask you, in the last 20 years, what kind of changes have you seen in that particular block?
Well, I've seen nothing in that particular block. Absolutely not. But at the same time, if you look in terms of what's gone on in the rest of the city, there's absolutely been changes, both in terms of sort of the economic model, in terms of sort of what we're doing. I mean, when I moved here, we weren't a restaurant destination, for instance. We're a restaurant destination now from lots of different people. People are bringing all sorts of things in. I think that it's becoming more attractive. I think that, frankly, one of the biggest drivers, it's almost back to what Ms. Hotelling was saying before. Actually, if you can tell me how Missouri as a whole is going to do economically, and especially this corner of Missouri that we're in, that's going to drive where the demand comes from more than anything else. I mean, we can do things that are really well, and some people choose to move here and others will choose to move out of their houses. But what you need is WashU Medical Center grows. We get the NGA comes here. We become more of a, we're an alternative to Austin or something like that in terms of where people are going to grow sort of tech firms. And that's what's going to actually drive the demand, as opposed to sort of moving people around. And that's unfortunately not something that a Webster really has an awful lot of control over.
That's correct. We're just one piece in a larger regional puzzle. And then you have the Missouri side versus the Illinois side. So it's sometimes I think you're better off being in the center of the state than being on on a border because you have competing interests on both sides of the river. So I mean, I'd go back to the, what we're discussing is not necessarily the opportunities and changes in all of Webster, but we're talking about the opportunities and changes within the TIF boundary as determined by the city. And notwithstanding, I think it's important to acknowledge that in the past 20 years, the Great Recession was absolutely real estate based and would certainly have potentially the impact of the opportunities for development over there. The other thing I would bring to your attention with the development area is the ability to pull together multiple parcels to create a development of reasonable size and scale. If you look at the area as it's zoned, and that's actually on, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, page 4 of the redevelopment plan where it talks about the zoning and what's there. Kind of go I kind of jump ahead to the piece of the but-for that really has hit me. The southeast quadrant, effectively, basically the eastern side of the entire redevelopment area as it stands, has already been planned commercial. And it's been planned commercial for a very long time. And that planned commercial zoning allows a developer to come in and propose a development of size, of magnitude, and be able to negotiate a lot of those zoning standards. And nobody has proposed anything there until the RFP came out. And if I hope everyone here has had a chance to review the two competing proposals, ultimately SG chose, or excuse me, the city chose the SG proposal because it addressed the entire block. The Novus proposal for the apartment building sits entirely within the the PC zoning, the planned commercial zoning. So Novus, for any number of years prior to the RFP that included TIF, didn't propose it. And then as soon as TIF was on the table, they have proposed it. So in my mind, that kind of is that's a very big sign of a but-for, whereas another developer, not just the SG Collaborative, but another developer saw the opportunity there on that block, but only presented it because a potential subsidy was on the table, when they could have proposed that exact same development on those pieces of property at any time prior to that. And I would ask the city, and I understand, Eric, you've been here for not necessarily that long, but Neil maybe longer, but I mean, did anybody try to put a development there on those pieces of properties that are zoned that way? Just so we're.
Yeah, so the PC zoning happened in, I believe, 1987. This is Mara Perry's area, but 1987. And to my knowledge, having talked with her about this, no one has brought forward a development plan. So PC zoning requires a development plan, such as you have in front of you, to then affect uses on that land. So actually the city moved to that zoning without a development plan, hoping the market would bring one. One did not come, to my knowledge, or come in a way that was ready to be adopted or that achieved adoption.
So I would kind of go back to the thing you talk about risk, and you talk about you don't necessarily believe that in the next 23 years there won't be development there. And I would agree with you. I think that it's entirely possible that potentially smaller pieces of those parcels, it's all chopped up, could be redeveloped. But I would challenge the thinking that any of those developments would be of scale to generate an assessment that has the potential to really move the needle in a significant way, like as opposed to this, which has assembled an entire development throughout the blocks. I mean, I agree. I'm gonna give Clark a shot here.
David and Pam, maybe you could address, since we're talking about risk, what you have talked about in terms of risk. If this happens the way it's laid out, what are the risks to the school district? I mean, that's a big piece for me, honestly.
Sure. So let me just go back to one thing before. I do think so. I readily accept nothing has been done with that. Nothing's been offered. I would suggest in part that's been because there've been more attractive places to go and develop. If you look at the development that's gone on in Maplewood, if you go and look at the development that's gone on in Kirkwood, you go and look at the development that's gone all around, those have probably been more attractive places to go and build it. At some point, we all know that we're living and there's only a finite amount of land. Developers are going to come in. And so perhaps it's almost sort of, restricted choice that this is the next place that goes. So perhaps the economics change. Now, maybe that's not the case. I accept that here we have an opportunity to go and do something sort of right now that's going to do something that's going to have, a tangible sort of economic impact. I'm not denying that. All I'm suggesting is that there may be alternatives. So I want us to judge this on its economic merits. In terms of the school district, obviously one of our concerns is frankly, so we've got 5 communities. So to the extent that we go and say we're not going to take, we're going to agree to forego tax revenue of something that grows here, to the extent we need to raise revenues elsewhere, we're going to be calling on the other communities that surround to go and cover that. So we're in a slightly different position than the city here. And that comes into it. In terms of the number of children they're going to move in, and so what's going on there. So the estimates that we've seen talked about sort of 40 children. It costs us $13,000 to, is about our costs per child. So if you, you can obviously do the math there. Are there going to be 40 children? Are there going to be 20 children? Are there going to be, 140 children? I suspect it depends a lot on what the development is. If it's single family, if it's single bedroom apartments, it's my guess there's not an awful lot. This isn't Boston. There's not a lot of people who are moving into those with families, and perhaps you might move in with one child, but it seems unlikely to me. So I accept that number may be high, but we don't know where that is, and that's a risk. But it's also just, again, in terms of, are we making a good economic decision, and and whether we want to call foregoing $35 million in investment, which is what I've done in the questions that I posed, or whether we say, no, it's money we weren't going to get anyway, which is sort of what's been thrown back on us. I understand that. But there's that aspect as well. So these are the sorts of things, as a steward of the school district's finances, that I'm taking into account here. And I'm trying to sort of separate. I'm here as a representative of the school district on the commission. My personal views as a resident of Webster may be entirely different, but that's not who I'm here to represent. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you did a good job covering everything, because we do have more to think about than just the taxpayers right here in the city of Webster Groves. We have to think about the taxpayers that live throughout our entire district, and we have to think about the impact of educating all of our children that go to the district. So we're trying to take all that into consideration as we go through the cost benefit analysis and all the data that's been provided.
Will the school district be taking a position? I mean, because if I recall at the last TIF Commission, Ms. Fraser, you indicated that you guys were still discussing it, and then hopefully by the time this commission meeting came around, that there would be a decision by the school district.
So as I think we indicated already, we're still having discussions with the developer and with the city. And my personal position is if the resolution is something that I believe is in the best district interests of the school district, then I will vote in favor of this. And if I do not believe it's in the best interests of the school district, I will vote against. I will not abstain.
And as a parent of a 2.5-year-old that goes to Ambrose and will go to public schools here in Webster Groves, I appreciate your stewardship of that. I also have a curious question though, and again, the projections on the number of children who may or may not inhabit the development is hard to say and up in the air. But I would also, at the same time, we have no limits on the number of people anyone in a household can have, or the number of children any household can have. And our property taxes aren't prorated based on the number of children that we have. So if you have, you could have 40 kids move into this development, or you could have 10 families with 4 children move into Webster Groves. We have some very large houses. We have some very elderly people that live in very large houses, and there's going to be some significant turnover. Does the school district, and this is a curious point, do you project or plan for demographic turnover and potentially for adding more children in these houses? Because I've seen that we could potentially be seeing more children move into the district because of the churn in the housing stock that we already have.
So I think that those are very good points, that it's not, in reality, it's the much more likely scenario is that a family that was, a person who was in, perhaps a couple that's living in an older house that, you know, has got more bedrooms says, I want to stay in the area. Now I've got an attractive alternative to go and move into. They move out, and yeah, I mean, a new family trying to move in. Now they've got an opportunity to be in Webster. And in reality, yes, that's where the extra children are going to come from. In terms of the demographics, yes, we do demographic studies. We've been doing those for a number of years. We're going and looking both at the number of births. And I realize, I'm sorry, this is way out of where we're trying to get to.
But this is all, this all matters because like you're talking about the number of students. And,
Yes.
and what's,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
this all
no, so
matters.
we're doing demo. We have for the last at least half a dozen years, we have had a demographer who comes back, goes and looks at what the the census data is, what the births are, and then what the transients is in and out. We're also looking at what the demand for the parochial schools is in the area. Obviously, we've got a we've a vibrant parochial school community in the area that some parents choose to go to. Pre-pandemic, we were seeing a lot more. We were seeing actually there was a decline in that, and those children were coming in. With the pandemic, and I think the rule, I mean, if we're being very frank, the rules that the parochial schools had related to in-person learning, relating to masks and things like that, made that more attractive alternative. Now that I think everybody's on a relatively level playing field, we're going to see how it shakes out. We've certainly seen some of those families who are coming back from the parochial back into the Webster schools, but we're doing a lot of this, and there is it's inexact, but the point you make, which is it's not that apartment that's getting people, it's the house that gets sold for that then, and that's where we're going to go and see the changes that then as a school district we're looking to go and educate those children.
But I would certainly think that those houses are selling regardless of this. I mean, I'm not to say there won't be a handful that they are committed to staying in Webster that would only sell if they had an alternative in Webster, but I've seen it happen. We're all watching it happen in our neighborhoods where the empty nesters are selling their houses to families.
Yeah,
and
I'm not
it's
suggesting
part
it's
of
going to
where
be
we are.
100, that this is going to change, but I say we're talking about 40 children on average for the life of this, then yes, I mean, that's perhaps 10 or 15 people who elect to move into the, who delay selling, and perhaps it's 20 people who delay selling their house for 5 years, and then another 20 delay it for another 5 years, and so it sort of rolls on. So you can see how from that standpoint. But I agree with you. Yeah, this isn't going to be the driver for 300 children coming into the district. Nobody's going and suggesting that for a second, even though there's that number of apartments and things like that.
Could this be part of the solution after 23 years, and we see this trend that's already occurring? We continue to see this turnover in our communities as far as residential, we are blessed to have a community people stay in for a long time and spend 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years in their homes, raise their children, have their children move down the street and have their grandchildren walk to their house.
They just live with
where I
otherwise.
live. My block is very much that way. So that's happening, and that's going to be the trend in Webster Groves. So the demand on the school district is going to increase. So this does provide, while it might be 23 years out or wherever the city council and the developers in their agreement, a huge tax incentive after 23 years that would support that growth in our schools, even if it is like struggling through to get there for 23 years or dealing with the incremental.
So I would say that's certainly a consideration, and we cannot ignore that. We need to look. It's not, at least from my, and again, so now perhaps from my personal perspective as a the parent and taxpayer, I absolutely agree with you. You have to go, and you can't say what's going on in the next 2 or 3 years. You need to look out long term, and so I think this is part of the discussion that we will have. I think. Well, for one, I mean, it's not just sort of my call, and people like Pam and our superintendent are probably actually much better qualified to do this. And so, my hope is that there's an understanding that we can come to that reflects the various different things here, and we can come up with something that that the district believes is fair. The one thing I'd point out is this, by the way, we sort of do this. If nobody was asking for a TIF, then the school district isn't any part of this at all. We're only here because you're asking for it, because the developer is asking for a TIF, and they're asking us to, you know, the district and everybody else to forego taxes that if this went through, it would otherwise be there. Now, obviously, equally, if there wasn't a TIF, then the comment's been made that there wouldn't be a development either. So it's, you know, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is really why I think this is why we're here, right? To have this discussion, to have it in an open forum. Ryan, you want to?
Yeah, no, I'm generally curious. I've been kind of quiet. I've been trying to take in a lot of this information. I think, you know, I believe it was Mr. Buck at the public hearing made this comment about risk, and that's where a lot of this, you know, this letter has kind of morphed from, because there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we're tasked with an up or down vote on this, you know, big TIF, but, you know, some of these unknowns about students and projections and so on and so forth. But I'm generally curious because, you know, I'm going to be a family of four, or excuse me, I have 4 children here pretty soon. And I feel like that's odd in our generation. I don't really see that change. And I guess based, you were talking about some of your projections and stuff. Where does a school district see generational kind of societal of children's, you know, children entering into 10, 15, 20 years from now? Because I think society's changing quite differently. I've got a lot of friends that aren't having children. And, you know, 20, 30 years ago when I was born, that was a different story. You know, it was families of 4s and 5s, and now it's 1s and 2s. So I'm really curious on your perspective on that.
So I think the simple answer is that you know, I don't know, and it would be irresponsible of me to try to go and sort of do things. I think it's certainly something that we can, you know, more broadly, you know, we have a demographer, and, you know, it's something sort of we can go and address back to them. I don't have I don't know. Do you have a?
No, I don't have that information handy. I can say, though, a lot of times a demographer will go out 10 years. It's kind of hard to go out 15,
Sure.
20, 23, 25 years is really unheard of. You know, we're lucky if we know for sure what's going to happen with our enrollment in, you know, the next 3 to 5 years.
I mean, basically, I mean, you know, about 5 or 6 years is certainly it's the only number we're really pretty certain of, and that's just in terms of the births. Then, you know, the movement in and out, we can go and, but it's an inexact science. And again, I mean, if I could tell you what was going to go and happen economically to the district, and sorry, I mean, not to the district, rather to the whole area, you know, I mean, there are so many unknowns there.
Based on recent history, I mean, are we seeing a decline though in children versus 10, 15 years ago?
We're seeing, so I don't know in terms of size of families in Webster. I will tell you that until the pandemic, we were seeing increasing numbers coming into the district. But in terms of how that related to family size versus how that related to transients versus, you know, in terms of people moving in and out of the area, versus how that related to people utilizing our parochial schools versus the public school system, you know, there were drivers among that, but I don't have any more specifics on that for you right now, I'm afraid.
No, thank you.
As far as this project and the project, I mean, all we can go on is projections. They're
Yes.
projecting 40 students or whatever to children to enter the school district. Are we concerned about infrastructure we currently have, or simply the tax side of it?
So we have obviously we've put you know, we put the extension in at the high school. That's put us in good shape from that standpoint. We just put together we've gone and moved our 6th grade to our middle school, and we've got the community school now in sort of on the Rock Hill sort of border there. So we have built capacity, and that capacity was built with the demographic trends partially in mind. There are other drivers for it as well, just in terms of better outcomes for students in terms of reduced transitions and things like that. But certainly one element of that also was to reflect the growth that we saw coming in. So we've been doing planning sort of for that. Do you remember how far out we go that we think that what we've got is sufficient? I don't.
No, off the top of my head, I do not. But we do feel like when we originally talked to development strategies that we have the facilities for the students. It's just the cost to educate the children. There's always still a cost, right? You may have a brick building, but there are all the other costs that go with it.
Perfect.
And I would say the infrastructure of your buildings is fairly old and right. I mean, a lot of the buildings are older and require more maintenance than potentially a new building would. So I do want to recognize that.
Mr. Chairman, if I can.
Yes,
So-
and then I believe development strategy is also.
Oh, development strategies, you ready to, go ahead, Justin. I'm going to buttonhole risk in for us.
Yeah, just wanted to say 2 or 3 things regarding the projections for students. The first is that when we did that, the number 40 is getting thrown around right now. And if you recall, when we talked about that initially, we were using national statistics based on, based on size of families, the mix of the units of 0, 1, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, right? And so, and then I think we might have applied a discount because it is national statistics and we're in a more of an inner ring suburban context versus some of the urban context that this was informing. So we kind of felt like 40 was the top. One of the things that we did was we looked at the 4 multifamily units that we used as comparables in our work, talked to the school districts at Maplewood, Richmond Heights, and Ladue to find out how many students were currently living in those apartment complexes that we kind of identified as comparables to this. Didn't hear back from the Ladue School District, but of the 3 multifamilies that were in the Maplewood, Richmond Heights School District, there were 6 students currently living in those multifamily units, in those multifamily buildings that were going to the public schools. And then if you factor that up to kind of get an equal size compared to the units that we would be talking about here, it's about 24 students. And so I just thought it was something that we haven't been able to, I just needed to write an email to Pam and send that to her, and I hadn't done it yet. So I just figured, since we're having this conversation tonight, I just wanted to put that out there that we had looked at that. The last thing I want to say also is that, and this goes to kind of David's point of, it's hard to project and it's hard to know when these impacts are going to occur. I don't know, I'm not a demographer, but I would also say that there's some reasonable expectation that it's less than 40. We're looking at something like 24 with some comparables, and it won't be 24 on day one. So there is going to be obviously some fluctuation over time, some build up to when those impacts might happen, but then also from a school district's perspective, having, I'm on the Afton School Board. So, I mean, we talk about these things as well. And we also know, at what grade level are they coming in? Is it creating a bubble? How does that ripple through? All of that is something that, like the school district certainly needs to be concerned about. And I don't think we know what that is. I think I'm just speaking purely from the numbers standpoint, and just, it won't be, whether it's 24 or 40 won't be that on day one, and to kind of consider that. Those are the 3 things I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Eric.
So I don't want to force our conversation, but we've been on risk a while, but I wanted to address a couple of the points you brought up about the scenarios, issues that are in the letter, the draft letter. I just want to be clear on the development agreement. Staff, regardless of whether or not you send this letter, the staff, meaning Mark and I, in working on the first draft, the development agreement, and our conversations with the city council, will be recommending many of the safeguards to mitigate risk factors. So any personal property tax loss in the construction period and then into new occupancy, those revenues still flow, hold harmless for the taxing jurisdictions, all of us around the table. If there is a way to bring in the TIF rate of return and meeting that, and how do we accelerate the TIF pay down and such, all of those are within the staff level recommendations. So I want to risk, the redevelopment agreement is really a concrete document that Mark and I are working on for this whole project, to discuss and pull in those types of elements. And then I just want to be very clear that, and I don't want to speak for any taxing jurisdiction, but the school district is an owner within the district, within the property area. So they will have the ability to discuss a purchase agreement with the developer. There will be an agreement that the city is not part of, that when we talk about risk, each party who is selling a parcel or is involved in this in some way should be taking those factors into account as well. So you can just see the whole picture of risk and how we mitigate it through many different sets of agreements and understandings.
Thank you, Eric. To the county, I feel like I've been, over here talking with David, but I want to make sure that I give anyone from the county an opportunity to weigh on this discussion of risk. Or are there any other things that you've seen from your interest in being at the table here?
I just have some clarifying questions for the city and the developer. So I was going to wait for you to get through the talking points you've identified, and then ask if that would
Cool.
be appropriate at that time.
All right, that's fantastic.
wanna
David, do you
speak
have
for
anything
my
else?
Can I make, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
I was just saying, I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire county appointments here. That's just my position.
I just wanted to make one other point, just, so if you look at other school districts, it's a very common that they will, they have a standard position, it's 0 on any TIF for residential. And the school district is not taking that position. So as we sit here and we talk about these things, I hope everyone bears in mind that I'm going to play hard for the school district, but we're not starting off by saying it's any residential needs to be, you know, we will not agree to anything. We're trying to be reasonable. We want to see the best done for Webster. We're going to, you know, we're going to play hard for the district within that, but we're not coming out and saying it has to be 0. And that's not the case if you were trying to do this in a lot of other places.
And if I could just add one more thing, talking about risk and the question and answers that we received that are sitting at our table tonight. One risk that shows for me, it says it is important to note that we do not yet know for sure how many apartments will be built, how many condominiums will be built, or how many townhomes will be built. So we know these are all estimates. And I do believe Development Strategies has done their best to do good, solid estimates, but there's still a risk in all of these estimates. Maybe it is 24. Maybe the market tells us something else and there's more townhomes built. But that's still a risk for us too.
No, absolutely. I think, again, it's important to acknowledge that the pro forma models are pro forma models, and like none of these numbers that any of us are evaluating are in fact real, concrete, you know, absolutely determined to happen. So it's important to keep that in mind when evaluating them. I'd also, well, we can come back to that. I have one more point on momentum, but we can come back to that later because I want to keep moving through because I understand Jacob has a question, so I want to get to that sort of general Q&A. So item number 4, the floodplain. This has been a big topic of discussion, right? And it's the reason why we have to, if we are going to vote for this, we have to do it and get it done on a timeline. So a lot of the gentleman from the Show Me Institute, what he did follow up with Eric with a document, more of a written letter reflecting the commentary that he wanted to extend when Councilman Franklin asked him a question. And I believe, Eric, that was part of the public record included.
It was sent out.
Yes. So other things he also did, though, is he sent several news articles that were written around the time of some of this floodplain legislation being discussed in the state legislature. And I appreciated that to be reminded of the news coverage and to have the opportunity to read that. I think with the key takeaway that I personally took away from the news coverage and the discussion around the legislation relating to TIFs is that the focus, the discussion, I think the intent of the legislation was to prevent the continued subsidies to developments in the floodplains of really the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, these large flood basins. You've seen what's happened to the Merrimack River because of the Valley Park levy. And in fact, the Army Corps of Engineers built a levee too tall, and it has upstream effects. These are very real issues that should be discussed and addressed. And quite frankly, I agree with that kind of floodplain development is not responsible development. But in nowhere in those discussions or the coverage where they were talking about some of the streams that we have in our communities. The 100-year floodplain, it affects Shady Creek, it affects Deer Creek. I've had to deal with it on projects that I've worked on in Rock Hill. And it's while it is in fact a issue that we have to address and deal with, I don't believe that the legislation was meant to prevent communities from having development in their own communities simply because a portion of a parcel touches the 100-year floodplain. I went back, and if you study the development plan, and I asked this of Development Strategies on their map where they've outlined and shaded where the floodplain is affecting the portions of the development zone, and that goes into part of that, maybe that was part of their blight study. The only beyond sort of making, yes, improvements to the creek and Clark, I know that you've expressed many concerns about the sort of environmental impact of the development on Shady Creek, and it's very important. But the only, beyond quote unquote the Riverwalk, the only real development that I see happening there is the replacement of the home, the one home that's currently in the floodplain with a finished floor within the floodplain, to the replacement of 6 to 10 potential townhomes that are built in a resilient manner, that are built with all the living space above that floodplain. So I would argue that that is a fundamental improvement to that northwest corner of the development area. The other thing I want to point out is that included in if you read Stock's report and the discussion, is the replacement of the culvert underneath Gore. Purposely, the boundary of the development area includes that bridge and that culvert. That is a 1.5, per my discussions with Eric, that is a plus or minus $1.5 million project. The same thing, can you discuss briefly what's going to happen at Elm?
Certainly. So Elm and Kirkham, a similar culvert is scheduled for replacement by the city, and it was budgeted at 1.25 million. Just to give you a sense of scope, that is all this year's expected revenues for the stormwater fund of the city and some fund balance pulling for that one culvert.
So, I mean, I see that. And so then I see the opportunity here for, per Stock's letter, the discussion of the floodwaters, and there was many videos that were submitted to us, and I saw the news coverage, I saw the videos on Facebook of the flooding, and per George Stock, who, if you don't work in construction and development, is a highly regarded, very well regarded civil engineer, on the record that part of what's causing the flooding is the constricted nature of the I'm blanking on the word now. The constricted nature of that pipe that goes underneath Gore. And so part of this development is to replace that. That's another $1.5 potential $1 million infrastructure portion. So that's 5% right there of the value of the TIF, that if that improvement is not made through this process, either never gets replaced or represents another $1.5 million hit to the city that has to be paid for somehow, some way. So I don't know how that storm sewer fund is funded, or how long it would take to build up the reserves again to be able to spend that over time. So I just want to point out that part of the reason why including the floodplain area within the development zone and within the TIF does have a public benefit of replacing that or correcting the drainage underneath that bridge, which we will lose the opportunity to take some of the tax increment financing from this development to do that. And so who else is going to do that or pay for it? So that was my thinking and my analysis of the floodplain issues. And does anybody else want to weigh in on those items?
So speaking on behalf of the school district, I have to think, well, then our tax revenue is going to go to take care of a city problem. So that is an issue for me. When to think of it that way, that's not a positive thing in my mind. That's a negative for the school district.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone from the county? Does the county have money to fix that for us?
We have other requests to the county. outside the culvert, so.
I believe it.
I mean, Eric, where does that money come from? Like for the Elm project right now?
The stormwater fund, that is tax revenue. I'm blanking right now if it's property or sales tax, but it's an extra tax that the city residents have agreed to for the stormwater fund. And there are significant other projects as well in the queue waiting for work on that. So, which I'm sure the mayor and our council members know well of as we talk about it. So
How does the city typically prioritize some of those flooding issues within, if the Elm one's slated for this year, what's the prioritization of those different areas?
It all comes within our capital planning budget, so it comes as part of the SIP. So we build out a 5-year plan for that, for the funds on capital improvement. And obviously, as I said, most of this project is taking the fund, the existing revenue for this year, and then also fund balance. So that it's built on a 5-year plan. I think we obviously have issues down near Jackson, near the Schnooks that we are looking at. We have this area and Shady Creek, other areas that may come up, and it'll take some time to replenish the fund, with those revenues year over year. So it may be 3-4 years before we're at a salient amount to be able to handle the culvert as it is. I didn't bring those projections with me. I'm sorry, but I can pull it up as we're talking, or provide the SIP to you all, the capital improvement plan.
Mr. Chair, I would like to just note that don't take the lack of questions from me personally as a lack of interest in this discussion, but we've discussed these issues in detail already, and they've been answered to my satisfaction. So just for the record.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. Let's see here. I also want to point out, because in the public comments, people referred us to the Donnybrook conversation with Professor Chris. Clark was actually the first person to share that with me. And there was discussion about development patterns over time and what has caused a lot of the flooding issues, similar to what Eric just pointed out, not just at Shady Creek. I think that a lot of the development patterns that we've seen in the past were not good. There are a lot better stormwater management practices, best management practices, slowing runoff, cleaning runoff. And I mean, on a personal level, right? I built a house in Webster Groves. I had to bury a large cistern of rock to capture all the runoff from my new house, because I could not add that to the runoff of MSD, right? So, I mean, every house that gets built in Webster Groves, if you're increasing the impervious area of your home, you have to make a investment that you literally are, effectively just buried money in my front yard. I have no doubt that this development will also be subject to those same rules. They're gonna, they'll have to, treat the storm water, they'll have to store the runoff, they'll have to implement those best management practices that are required today of developments that were never required of developments in the past. So again, to the point that the gentleman in that Donnybrook episode was making about how our development patterns have affected the increase of flash flooding in some of these creeks. I think that this, and having been involved in other developments and seeing what's required, that those things are changing and they're being corrected. And when you have a redevelopment, you actually have the opportunity to fix problems that result in runoff. So, and I don't want to keep taking the last item on those things. I just want to make sure I address all the public comments. Does anyone else having to weigh in on the floodplain?
I just have one more question. I think it's probably best directed towards Eric, but I've seen the videos. I haven't witnessed it firsthand when the issue is. I live up the street from it. So I, haven't been necessarily negatively impacted, but I'm curious if, for instance, with this most recent one, back in August, I think it was, are we aware of residents being financially impacted? Are their homes being damaged, or I know the Baptist church, I've seen the videos kind of going across their parking lot and around the structure, but are you aware of any financial implications that our residents are currently incurring today?
I am not aware of any. That does not mean they don't exist, but I'm not aware of it.
Anything else?
No, I just wanted to weigh in that I'm typically skeptical of improvements to nature, but those issues have affected that creek for decades. I mean, there's pictures, back in the 20s, where, at Shady Creek, it was flooded all the time. And I think that the Corps of Engineers came in and tried to mitigate it, maybe made those pinch points and culverts that maybe made it even worse. So I'm always a little skeptical when I hear, hey, it's going to be improved. But I don't discount that 100%, because it is a problem now, and it's not going to go away by doing nothing, for sure. It's still going to flood, and we'll still have those. So, I'm just questioning yeah, we saw the things in April, but that doesn't really prove anything to say this development's going to make it worse.
Correct.
Or is it going to make it better? That's where I'm really struggling with to make sure I have clarity around it being better than it is today.
And I agree with you there, Clark, and I want to, recognize the concerns of the public that they have for the flooding. It's not a non-concern, but I have to also weigh in, again, the engineering letter, the credibility of the engineering. This is a licensed professional. His credibility, his way of making a living is on the line, and I understand what is going to be required of new developments. So I have comfort that, at least from a flood standpoint, from the environmental, I'm not as well educated on that, but I have to trust that best management practices will be followed there. So the next time was Blight. This was a big one, and I think it's really important to recognize that both the gentleman from the Show Me Institute and Larry have acknowledged that Blight is a checklist when it comes to TIF. So right, there's a perception of Blight, and what does Blight mean? And I think you hear Blight and you have an image in your head. But I would also tell you that, to the point of it, Blight being a checklist, I've seen development deals blight portions of the blocks of downtown Clayton, Missouri. I would press anyone here to show me a block of downtown Clayton, Missouri that, in your mind's perception of Blight, meets that perception, but it certainly meets the checklist for Blight. That is the test for blighting a portion. I'd also point out that in all of the opportunities for public comment, not a single property owner has come to us to say, do not blight our property. And that includes the school district. That includes Webster University. That includes Red Lemoore. That includes the gym center. That includes any number of landlords and property owners, and that not a single one has come to us and said, do not blight us. We're not, our properties are not blighted. So in fact, the only property owner who's reached out to us is the operators of Rolling Ridge, who are concerned about making sure that they have significant parking, because they currently have 60 parking stalls, and they've purchased property over there. For me personally, that silence from the property owners is a very loud endorsement of the blighting portion of this consideration. So I want to throw that out there and give anybody the opportunity to talk about their feelings about the blight portion of this process. Okay. Again, anybody online? All right. So that was, I had 6 items, right? Going from Blight. The last item I had was talking about the Novus development, the but-for. David, I think we kind of got into that a little bit in the risk discussion. I'd also tell you, just from an overall development, that the SG version is just better. The Novus development is something you build in Chesterfield. It's a Texas wrap with a parking garage. It creates no streetscape. So, to that point, I think the city has made the right decision in selecting the SG version of this. Does anyone, and I made my point about the planned commercial zoning of the aspect. No one's come forward with one, except until TIF was provided. I feel like that proves the but-for. Does anyone else want to continue to sort of beat up that issue or talk through it anymore? Or are we prepared to sort of get into Jacob's questions, which I'm kind of eager to hear as well?
Mr. Chair, just briefly, it's Kevin, sorry.
Who's that?
It's Kevin, Jacob's
I'm
online.
sorry. I'm seeing the name.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could, just development strategies, if you could, Katie, I'm going to put you on the spot, but the but-for test is a critical piece of TIF. And so I just want them to address the pro forma and the cost benefit analysis, just briefly on but-for and the feasibility of this project without TIF.
Bear with me for 1 minute because everything's on my computer today.
I'd probably also ask you to remove your mask, because I feel like that.
Yes,
that
probably
I
a good
know,
idea.
That mic seems to be one of the hardest ones to work without a mask.
Understood. So I guess, do you want me to give you just a very brief overview of the cost benefit analysis again, just so everybody can hear it again?
I think it's really just,
Or-
does this meet a but-for test in the
Yeah,
experience that you
so
see in the
I think,
feasibility?
in our opinion, it meets the but-for test. Larry mentioned 2 weeks ago, we were concerned about the, I guess, skinniness of the deal, even with TIF. But, our conversations, and we've had multiple conversations with them about their willingness to proceed with the deal, even with kind of a lower end of acceptable return with TIF. I'll tell you, without TIF, it just isn't going to work, especially today. I think everybody sees the news. Construction prices are through the roof. Prices in general are through the roof. And in Missouri specifically, TIF is more and more just almost necessary to get considerable development projects actually completed because of a host of issues. But it really, this one in particular, it just won't work without some sort of subsidy. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, questions?
Me?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Okay, city, just really quickly, I don't know if it's Mr. Bruntrager, Grimm, or Eric who needs an answer. So back to the RFP that kind of led to all this, the council, I imagine the council didn't, the city council that is, didn't develop the RFP, but they voted at some point to select the developer that came from that RFP.
That is correct. The RFP was developed by Mr. Grimm and issued by the city. There were 2 respondents. One was deemed to comply with the RFP, meaning the whole entire project area. And then the council did vote, I believe it was in early 2020, Neil, is that correct? They voted 6-0 to select ST as the preferred developer, and we can provide that resolution if you would like to have it.
Was there a separate vote from the city council to establish this commission, or did that just happen because of their selection of the developer?
There was a separate action to convene the TIF Commission. That resolution is on the TIF Commission website.
Looking forward, so the council, then the city council will have a say, will have to vote to approve not only this TIF project based on our recommendation, but the zoning around this whole development. That's a separate vote that the city council will have to take.
That's correct, yes.
So there's at least 2 pieces after this recommendation is complete, after this commission's work is complete, there's at least 2 more steps that involves a vote of the city council.
There's actually 3. So the other one of them be the development agreement, the ordinance that is an agreement between, that contains those other provisions. So yes.
Well, you stole my next question, Eric. That was going to be my next. And then specifically to you, you said earlier that when that development agreement is being worked on, you'll be there from a staff perspective and you'll be sure that there are safeguards involved. Why? I mean, is that because you work for the city? It's
Sure. So I want to be very clear. I want you to be assured that from a staff we are providing a staff recommendation that the council include those. The council can always ignore the staff or council's advice, obviously. But I believe in my conversations with council members, and I will not speak for them, but what I hear is that should this development go forward, they do want significant safeguards and assurances in writing that are enforceable, that the oral agreements and the assertions that we've heard from the developer, the things the developer has heard from us are all codified and transparent and are enforceable so that we can enforce against that agreement in the future to achieve the goals and objectives of the development.
So would it ultimately be reasonable to say that the reason that the city would want to ensure that there are safeguards in that development agreement is because the city is looking out for its residents and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars in that regard?
I would think that would be the primary purpose for us to do that, yes.
All right, thank you very much. My other questions are for Mr. Chapman, if you want to go on the same vein with.
No, let's keep going. I rolled through. I feel like I wanted to hit all those items. I think we've hit them. So now it's just open floor.
Yes, sir.
Just really quickly, you've been in this business a while, yes? Development, that is?
42 years, yes.
Okay, and so could you ballpark a number of developments that you've overseen in St. Louis County? Could you just throw out a number for me?
Well, I'd have to check for St. Louis County. I do know in total in my life, I built 138 buildings and 32 business parks.
Okay, and out of that number, I mean, how many, okay, let me ask you this. In St. Louis County, of any of those projects, have you received any public assistance of any type, any TIF dollars?
Yes,
Okay, and have those been successful developments?
all of them.
Okay, so along that line then, let me just ask you point blank, would you consider yourself, your company, your business, a good steward of taxpayer dollars that have been entrusted to you via processes like this?
I believe we have been very good stewards and have done a great job for the community, all things considered. Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. And then is it your understanding that as this goes through, and I'm imagining this ties into the development agreement piece, if this is approved and the city decides to approve it, all contracting, anybody that you'll, pick for construction jobs and all of that, that will be the city's whatever codes in terms of perhaps minority participation or prevailing wage requirements, all of that would apply, correct?
All that'll always apply on a project like this. Yes, sir.
And that would all come through competitive bidding processes as well?
The competitive bidding process is right based on where we are. This will be an all union job. There'll be a huge effort put on MBE, WB participation, both in terms of workforce and contracting. And we have a very good track record of doing that as well.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Chapman.
If I may, could I ask a question of Mr. Franklin? You are the council's liaison to this commission. Is that more or less? Do you have a sense of where the council stands on this? Are they enthusiastic about this project? Are they dubious about it? Is that a question that you feel you can answer?
David, if you could use your microphone. Thank you.
I feel like I can answer, and the reason I can't is I think that too often council speaks individually, obviously, but if we're going to speak collectively, it's going to be hard. And so I think the easiest way to determine where each individual council members through council action. I will say this, we obviously initiated. So I will concede that council, whether it's when I was on it or previous councils, began the process in order to request a proposal.
Were you on it?
I was here when the request for a proposal went out. I was not here when this initially started.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in with anything before I kind of move on to the next piece here? It doesn't sound like it. I don't, I absolutely get the sense that the school district wants more time to evaluate what the impacts and the risks and how your position will be. So I don't think that we're going to have a vote tonight. Eric, is there anything that we need to do because we're not voting?
We don't need to,
Procedurally?
if the commission doesn't want to vote, and I'm hearing that, and I've been getting emails about coordinating a meeting with the school district tomorrow, which we are happy to do. So if the commission wants to continue and have voting, we can do that. We just need to set the next date. And so, if we're ready to talk about that, we can all whip out our calendars, and we obviously, our deadline has been moved up. Mr. Grimm informed us about the statutory deadline, so that shortens our window a bit on getting that in. So because we'll need to be by November 27th, right, Mr. Grimm, 30 days. So that would be November 27th.
Bless you. Okay, so that's my wife's birthday. All right.
So just to bring everyone's attention, we did poll members. We heard from everyone but 3 of the members. That's fine. If we're looking at Monday night, the 22nd, which is a very easy night to schedule, Monday of Thanksgiving, give some time to put things in order. We do have a couple members that aren't available that night. So I don't know if it's not available or it could be on Zoom. So we can talk about that, or we can look at some other possibilities as well as we go through calendars. So.
Okay, and we have to do that. We have to figure out the date tonight.
We don't need to figure, I mean, if you want me to doodle poll it and that kind of thing, we can, but in the next 24 to 36 hours, we need to get a date on the calendar so everyone can not get their calendars all
since we got everybody here, I'd like to, hopefully we could try to get something figured out. So, okay, so Monday, the 22nd.
So
Is
that's
there-
one that
what
we.
about before that? I mean, is
Yep.
there,
So,
I guess the question is of how much time,
sure.
how much time I guess a function of how much time we need is a function of the school district. Right? I mean, I think, is there any, I guess I'll ask it this way. Is there anybody from the county that would like more time? Is there anybody from the city or the taxing district that would like more time to deliberate or consider?
You asking?
I'm asking, yeah.
Go forward tonight with a vote?
Well, no, I want to respect the school.
I think he's
district.
trying to figure out how many
I'm
people
just
need
trying
to be in a
understand, like,
meeting.
I'm
So,
kind of gonna, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in the school district's kind of court as far as how soon they think we can return to the table here with, so that we can consider some dates. Understanding that we have, till November 27th,
Right.
which is the Friday after Thanksgiving. That's dead. Thursday's dead. Not gonna be able to do. the
Wednesday's
Wednesday
dead. So, I
before,
mean,
right?
we could do that Monday night. We could do Tuesday night of that week. Is a possibility. I don't know if the county council is meeting that week or not. Thanksgiving week, I wasn't sure. They are, okay. So that takes Tuesday night off. But also, if you want to look at, if it's not too early, next Wednesday is a possibility. I'd have to find a different room because the municipal court's meeting, or we meet after them. So,
I recommend, but in order to give the school district a maximum amount of time within the window we have, focus on the 22nd.
the 23rd is probably off the table because of county council, right?
Yeah, I mean,
We can do both of those, by the way.
22nd.
What's that? We can do both the 22nd and the 23rd.
Okay,
I'm not available the 22nd, but I am 23rd.
okay.
Same here, Mr. Chair. I'm not available on the 22nd, but I am available on the 23rd.
The St. Louis County Planning Commission meets on Monday night, the 22nd, so I'm not available that evening.
How does daytime look on the 23rd? Can we do a daytime meeting? Or is anyone completely off limits because of work? I don't think it needs to be long. I mean, it's a matter of how much discussion or questions that need to be answered. So,
I would imagine that any discussion that needed to remain that hadn't already been addressed would be at the behest of the school district. So I have no issue on the 23rd, anytime that day.
And a vote, I mean, we can vote on Zoom, via Zoom,
absolutely, being on Zoom is just like present here in the
Okay.
room. So,
but you can't vote if you're not even, like, if Mark's unavailable on the 22nd, he has to be present either in person.
be on
or
the Zoom, yes, to be
Okay.
able to cast his vote. Yes. Sorry.
23rd sounds like it's a better day, just based on people who responded.
That work with county.
I mean, if we're looking at a daytime slot, then the 22nd or 20, I don't know if that changes other people who have conflicts on the 22nd, but certainly a daytime slot would help avoid the conflict with the county council meeting that evening. Yes.
That would work for me as well.
Yeah, also for me, if it's on the 22nd during the day, that works for me.
I'm not available at any point on the 22nd. I'm
Only the 23rd.
Are you available? on the
23rd. I can make daytime or evening work.
Okay. So Jay, you're good on the 23rd. Ray, Jacob.
During the day on the 23rd is fine. Earlier in the day, if it was a morning meeting, would be preferable.
Okay. So when we talk about morning, 10 a.m., 9 a.m., what are people?
10, 9, whatever works.
10 a.m. is fine.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. is fine.
10 a.m.
Yeah,
10
make that
a.m.
work.
10 a.m. on the 23rd.
Got it.
Cool. All
So
right.
we will have Zoom open and this room will be available. So
This room will be
members that do
available as
want to be
well.
here
Okay.
can be present.
I'll make myself available to be here in person, but anyone else who wants to be on Zoom, feel free.
That is 23rd, 10 a.m.
23rd, 10 a.m. Yeah, maybe actually, I'll probably just go ahead and put it in here right now. Actually, I do have one other question for you here.
Mhm.
I've seen discussion about potentially other multifamily developments in Webster that are being potentially discussed. Obviously, we talked about, there's already one that's in front of the Plan Commission. It's certainly of a smaller scale, but are you at liberty to,
Oh, yeah,
can you
the-
talk about the potential for other multifamily developments in Webster
So
Groves?
there are other multifamily developments, much smaller in scale, that are being proposed. They're all in front of zoning and through the planning process right now. One is public, that is 55 West Moody, the Bank of America drive-through near this project area. None of them have approached and requested or discussed TIF subsidies in any way. So should any of them come, then obviously we will, the council, should they desire to move that way, would convene the TIF Commission for those projects as well.
Gotcha. Okay. I really wouldn't expect a TIF request for a project of that smaller scale. But I think the one thing I would say, and then to Pam and David, as you consider and deliberate, you know, I would, and David Franklin just left the room, but he had said something kind of early to me, which is, you know, ultimately, like whether if we approve the TIF, we are not approving the development. And ultimately that comes down to city council. That is their opportunity to approve a development agreement that will take into consider, ultimately what we're voting on is a recommendation. And then, you know, if we choose to make that recommendation, then we can have a discussion about a letter of other things that we would put forth potential to the city council to consider. So, you know, one of the things to think about is there is potential for other developments and redevelopment in Webster that will also increase the assessed value of the overall properties in the district. And one other, you know, by, you know, the potential to, and I understand you always have to look out for what's best for you. But you know, the idea that our action on the TIF will send a message outwardly, whether or not, and actually I would say ultimately to the Plan Commission, the City Council, whether or not Webster Groves is pro-development or whether or not Webster Groves is anti-development. And the decisions that are made through this activity also have the potential to affect the ability of other people who want to put housing in Webster Groves. It's going to affect their ability to attract capital. I mean, I will tell you that St. Louis pays a risk premium to capital providers because they do not see St. Louis as a safer investment for their money when they can take it to other regions. And so that's some of the reason why, you know, we have kind of in a position where we oftentimes need to subsidize development because we need to offset the risk of how other people outside see us. So we have the potential, and I would say momentum. You know, there's a lot of opportunity to create more housing units, bring more people into Webster Groves, increase our population. And I would say that by moving forward, we have the potential to signal that there is more momentum in Webster Groves for development, increasing assessments, and therefore increasing revenue to the school districts. So I kind of want to put that out there. With that, y'all, I don't take a vote on that. Meeting adjourned. Meeting adjourned. I'm going to bang this gavel up here.